What if everything Prince Harry gave up his royal life for was built on betrayal? The Montecito morning fog hadn't yet cleared when the world began to whisper. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The tall black gates of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's palatial estate remained shut tighter than usual. The usual routine, the carefully choreographed smiles to paparazzi, the charitable photo ops, the eco-friendly Range Rovers shuttling to and from Santa Barbara, had vanished. In their place, silence. Deafening, deliberate silence. Before we continue, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Then came the first flash. Not from a camera, but from a leak. It started with a single headline: Prince Harry leaves Montecito alone, Meghan nowhere in sight. By the time the sun was up on both coasts, it wasn't just gossip blogs running the story. Mainstream media picked it up. Pundits speculated. Satellite vans rolled into the quiet cul-de-sac where the Duke and Duchess had attempted to build a new kind of royal fairy tale. But it wasn't a fairy tale anymore. It was a slow-burning implosion. What exactly had broken this union that once appeared so unshakably defiant in the face of tradition, scrutiny, and scandal? How had the once enchanted ex-royal couple, who declared freedom and love above all else, fallen into such silence, such isolation, such chaos? Sources close to the couple began speaking in hushed tones. They described late-night screaming matches, separate bedrooms, months-long emotional withdrawal, and worst of all, accusations. Not just of emotional distance or incompatibility, but of betrayal. But the betrayal didn't come from a stranger or distant threat. It came, allegedly, from two of Meghan Markle's closest confidants. Two names the public had come to recognize as her protectors, her allies, her inner circle: Markus and Tyler Perry. These were not new faces in Meghan's orbit. Markus had been there from the beginning, long before Prince Harry. A key executive at Soho House, the private club Meghan frequented in Toronto, Markus was instrumental in introducing her to the elite social world that would later become her launchpad into royal life. His presence never waned, not even after the wedding. He was always close. Too close, some said. Then came Tyler Perry, a Hollywood titan who offered the couple sanctuary in their moment of crisis. He gave them more than just a mansion. He gave them cover, resources, and influence. He became Archie's godfather. He became family. But recently, that closeness has taken on a new tone. Whispers emerged from Meghan's former staff. Former aides, stylists, and even a driver alleged they had seen things: glances, touch, unexplained absences, long late-night calls. At first, it was easy to dismiss them as bitter ex-employees or gossip-hungry opportunists. But the evidence started to mount. And then, allegedly, Prince Harry found something he could not ignore. It wasn't just a rumor anymore. It was something tangible. According to reports from a source within Harry's security team, the Duke allegedly uncovered messages, intimate in tone, questionable in content, on an iPad left in the Montecito home. These weren't messages between old friends. They were between Meghan and Markus, and Meghan and Tyler. Both men, in different contexts, were engaged in conversations that stretched far beyond friendship. Some messages referenced quiet getaways, missed moments, and, most jarringly, emotional intimacy during times Harry was out of the country. The emotional blow was seismic. After years of sacrificing his royal title, his security, his relationship with his family, Prince Harry was faced with the possibility that the woman he had fought the world to protect was hiding a web of emotional entanglements, possibly more, from right under his nose. And when Harry confronted Meghan, the walls didn't come crashing down in a melodramatic explosion. They cracked in silence. According to insiders, Meghan denied any wrongdoing but struggled to explain the tone of the messages. She maintained that Markus was her best friend, a fixture from a time when her world was collapsing, and she needed someone who knew her before she became royalty. As for Tyler, she allegedly insisted that his emotional support was misinterpreted and nothing had ever crossed a line. But Harry wasn't convinced. Not anymore. The same instinct that once told him to flee the palace for the sake of his mental health now screamed at him to protect his peace again. But this time, from within his own home. So he left. Not to a hotel, not to a Hollywood friend's couch, but to a private estate in Scotland, one that had been in royal hands for generations, untouched by the Netflix deals or Spotify contracts. He went quiet, and Meghan, for once, couldn't follow. The optics shifted immediately. For years, the Sussexes had been a united front, at least in public. Even when they were being dragged by tabloids or satirized by cartoon parodies, they stood shoulder to shoulder. But now, Meghan was seen alone, walking the Montecito farmers market with a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses, speaking at a women's business conference without mentioning Harry once, posting cryptic quotes about loyalty and truth on her private social account. And most curiously, she'd allegedly blocked several senior royal family members from contacting her. The world began to ask the one question no one dared ask before. Was this the end? Because if Harry, ever loyal, ever protective, ever devoted, could walk away, it meant something catastrophic had occurred. Something even stronger than the pressure of the crown. Something more piercing than British tabloid cruelty. Something more painful than exile from his family. It meant trust had been broken. But this story isn't just about gossip. It isn't about a crumbling Hollywood meets royalty romance. It's about identity, power, secrecy, and a man finally realizing that the battle he thought he was fighting with the world may have actually been one he needed to fight in his own home. In this investigation, we'll walk you through the full story. From Meghan's early days with Markus in Toronto, to the first time Tyler Perry came to her rescue, to the late-night phone calls that may have gone too far. We'll trace the subtle clues that began years ago and build a timeline of how the emotional and possibly physical affairs allegedly unfolded, unbeknownst to Harry. We'll look at Meghan's shifting public behavior, the media manipulation techniques at play, and what insiders are now describing as a calculated strategy to keep Harry emotionally dependent while privately forging alternative alliances. We'll uncover the impact on Harry's mental state, how he's reportedly isolated, disillusioned, and questioning every decision he's made since leaving the royal family. And most crucially, we'll show how this scandal is more than personal. It's potentially political, financial, and deeply damaging to the institutions and public personas both Meghan and Harry have fought to build. Because the truth is, behind every carefully curated Instagram post, behind every media appearance filled with buzzwords like authenticity, healing, and liberation, lies a deeper, darker story. A story about betrayal cloaked in empathy, power hidden behind smiles, and fame used not as a spotlight, but as a weapon. So buckle in. What you're about to hear isn't a tabloid fairy tale. It's a modern tragedy playing out in real time, in front of millions, and the ending might not be what you expect. And as we dive into this unraveling relationship, ask yourself one question. If even Prince Harry couldn't see the betrayal coming, what chance would anyone else have had? This is just the beginning. From the very beginning, their love story was framed as a rebellion wrapped in romance. A prince who walked away from the trappings of royal life, and a modern woman who challenged centuries of tradition. It was the kind of story that headlines couldn't get enough of. The kind of story that the public wanted to believe in, because it felt like hope. It felt like change. It felt like something rare in a world of rehearsed royal appearances and emotionless protocol. But underneath the surface, as we now know, not everything was as it seemed. It all began with a blind date in London, reportedly set up by a mutual friend in early 2016. At the time, Meghan Markle was best known as the star of the legal drama Suits. She had a budding lifestyle blog, The Tig, and a reputation for activism and social causes. She was ambitious, articulate, and stunning. Prince Harry, meanwhile, was still one of the most sought-after bachelors in the world. He was a military veteran with a streak of wildness in his past and a well-documented discomfort with the royal machine. Their chemistry was immediate, and so was the global media frenzy. Within a few months, they were quietly dating, meeting between Toronto and London, hiding from cameras, building something intimate while the world outside speculated wildly. By late 2016, the relationship was confirmed when Harry issued a rare public statement condemning racist and sexist abuse directed at Meghan and the press. It was the first real signal that this was more than a fling. This was serious. Serious enough that the palace had to get involved. The press went into overdrive. Suddenly, every aspect of Meghan's life was scrutinized. Her past relationships, her family, her ethnicity, her career, even her fashion choices. But instead of shrinking under the pressure, Meghan leaned into it. She began to be seen as a symbol of progress, a woman of color entering one of the widest, most tradition-bound institutions in the world. Their engagement in November 2017 felt like a culmination of that symbolism. The BBC interview announcing their engagement became instantly iconic. They laughed, they touched hands, they spoke openly about falling in love over roast chicken and cozy nights indoors. It was relatable. It was unfiltered. It felt real. And when the royal wedding took place in May 2018 at Windsor Castle, it was nothing short of a spectacle. Meghan walked herself down part of the aisle. A gospel choir sang "Stand By Me." Black culture and American flair mixed with British royal tradition in a way never seen before. The global audience exceeded 29 million in the US alone. For one moment, the monarchy looked modern, inclusive, and forward-thinking. Harry and Meghan were hailed as the faces of a new royal era. But the fairy tale wasn't without friction. Almost immediately after the wedding, the press coverage began to shift. Rumors of Meghan being difficult on set. Stories about a feud with Kate Middleton. Tensions between Harry and Prince William. Aides began to resign at a curious rate, with some anonymously labeling Meghan a perfectionist with a sharp tongue. The so-called Markle debacle surrounding her father's absence from the wedding further fueled negative press cycles. Despite the growing cracks in the public narrative, Harry and Meghan doubled down on their image as an invincible unit. When they announced Meghan's first pregnancy during their tour of Australia in late 2018, the public was elated. Photos of the couple beaming at children's hospitals and Indigenous cultural events dominated headlines. Meghan's baby bump became a constant feature in the media. She was glowing, they said. Harry was protective and doting. They were, again, the image of modern love. But behind closed doors, according to multiple former palace staffers, there were already warning signs. Staff reported that Meghan had begun cutting off longtime members of Harry's inner circle. Former military friends who had been by Harry's side since his days in Afghanistan suddenly found themselves excluded from events and ignored in messages. There were whispers that Meghan didn't trust anyone she hadn't brought into the fold herself. Still, to the public, everything appeared golden. The birth of Archie in May 2019 was greeted with joy and anticipation. Yet even this milestone was handled differently. Meghan and Harry chose not to pose for photos on the hospital steps like royal tradition dictated. Instead, they released a highly controlled, tightly curated set of images and limited media access to a minimum. It was a clear signal. This was their family, and they were setting their own rules. By early 2020, the royal couple dropped their biggest bombshell yet. In an Instagram post, they announced their decision to step back as senior members of the royal family. They intended to split their time between the UK and North America and become financially independent. The palace was reportedly blindsided. Behind the scenes, there were emergency meetings, angry phone calls, and damaged relationships. The press labeled it Megxit, a play on the Brexit drama, insinuating that Meghan was the driving force behind Harry's departure. Harry, however, insisted it was his decision to protect his wife and son from the same kind of media abuse that had plagued his mother, Princess Diana. In public, they stood united. In private, the gap between them and the royal family was growing more unbridgeable by the day. When they relocated to Canada briefly, and then eventually to California, the couple sought refuge away from palace protocol. They secured deals with Netflix and Spotify. Meghan signed with a talent agency and began developing projects under the Archewell brand. Harry focused on mental health advocacy, particularly through projects like The Me You Can't See with Oprah. They released a series of interviews, podcast episodes, and documentaries that gave the public a deeper look into their version of events. Yet even in these controlled narratives, the image they presented of a couple who survived it all together seemed overly polished, over-rehearsed, too perfectly in sync. Observers began to notice subtle inconsistencies. Meghan spoke of deep depression and isolation, while Harry described their post-royal life as beautiful and peaceful. Meghan claimed she had no idea who Harry really was before dating him, yet was known to have attended public events where he spoke years earlier. The facade held, but barely. As more media attention focused on Meghan's professional moves, a pattern emerged. People close to her would often cycle in and out of her life. Designers, business partners, publicists, all seemed to come and go rapidly. But the constants? Markus and Tyler Perry. No matter how many times the team around her shifted, these two remained steadfast, seemingly immune from the high turnover that surrounded the Sussex household. In photo ops, public statements, and even private conversations relayed by insiders, both men were treated with an almost reverent status by Meghan. Markus was seen as her sounding board, confidant, emotional counselor. Tyler, more of a guardian figure, offering protection, privacy, and Hollywood influence. But what no one saw coming was how the presence of these two friends would eventually be tied to the unraveling of Harry and Meghan's carefully constructed life. The illusion had held for years, through the royal wedding, the royal exit, and the Hollywood transition. But as the cracks widened, the illusion began to crumble. And the truths hidden behind smiles, curated interviews, and filtered photos would soon explode into the public arena. This chapter of their story, of royal glamour and modern reinvention, was coming to a violent close. And behind it lay a trail of missteps, secrets, and betrayals that not even the most polished image could conceal. For all the glittering lights of the red carpets, the staged royal smiles, and the Netflix-approved moments of marital bliss, a quieter, more intricate web was being spun just behind the curtain, woven not by enemies, but by those Meghan herself called friends. Two names, in particular, now dominate the hidden chapter of this story: Markus Anderson and Tyler Perry. They weren't just figures lurking in the periphery. They were fixtures in Meghan's world, constant presences in her personal and professional life, deeply embedded in the structure she built for herself both before and during her time with Prince Harry. But who exactly were they to her? And how did they become so powerful in her life that they would eventually be accused of playing a role in dismantling one of the most talked-about marriages in modern history? Let's begin with Markus Anderson. To the average person, Markus's name might only ring a vague bell. But in elite circles, especially among the Hollywood meets royalty socialites, he's well known. He is a senior executive at Soho House, a global network of exclusive private members clubs where the worlds of media, entertainment, and high finance regularly collide. Meghan's connection with Markus dates back to her Suits era in Toronto, long before she ever met Prince Harry. Back then, she was still a rising actress, hungry for roles, always networking, carefully cultivating the kind of image that would eventually open new doors. And Markus? He was her gatekeeper. Friends of Meghan from that time describe him as magnetic, sharply dressed, and deeply influential. One of the few people she allowed unfiltered access to her personal life. They were often seen together at high-profile events, weekend getaways, and fashion parties. He introduced her to key players in the Canadian elite, helped her land tables at exclusive restaurants, and provided a kind of social cover. In return, Meghan gave him loyalty and, reportedly, an emotional intimacy that raised eyebrows even back then. So when Meghan and Harry began their courtship in secret, it came as no surprise that Markus was one of the very first people in her inner circle to meet the prince. In fact, some royal commentators have argued that it was Markus who indirectly facilitated Meghan and Harry's first meeting through shared social networks. He remained a steady presence in her life even after the engagement, often traveling quietly between London and North America. He attended the royal wedding. He was given a prime seat. That kind of placement was not for casual acquaintances. And yet, what exactly was his role? Unlike other friends who drifted away from Meghan post-wedding, either by her design or royal protocol, Markus remained, not just as a friend, but as a shadow advisor. Whenever Meghan appeared at high-profile events, Markus was said to be somewhere behind the scenes, sometimes helping with image crafting, sometimes just being there. Former palace aides have claimed that they were instructed to treat him almost as an unofficial spokesperson, with Meghan deferring major lifestyle or social decisions to him. That level of access would continue into the California chapter of their life. When the Sussexes relocated to North America, Markus was one of the very few people allowed into their inner sanctum. He was spotted at Meghan's side during business meetings and strategy discussions for Archewell, and even reportedly involved in choosing key staff members. He would vanish and reappear without warning, traveling under the radar, often staying at the couple's Montecito mansion for extended periods. As for Prince Harry, insiders say he was always polite to Markus, always cordial. But something about the relationship didn't sit right. Some suggest Harry never fully understood their closeness. Others say he tried to ignore it. But the more time Markus spent around Meghan, the more isolated Harry seemed to become. And then came the second name in this tangled narrative, Tyler Perry. Known globally as an actor, filmmaker, and studio mogul, Tyler Perry's entry into the Meghan-Harry storyline came at a critical point in their life. After the explosive decision to leave royal duties in early 2020, Harry and Meghan were suddenly exposed. The royal security detail had been pulled. Their plans to base themselves in Canada began to crumble under media pressure. They needed safety, privacy, and a place to regroup. That's when Perry stepped in, offering them his ultra-secure Beverly Hills mansion and private security detail. The offer seemed generous, even altruistic. At a time when the world seemed to be turning against them, Tyler gave them shelter. But his role didn't end there. Not only did Perry provide physical security, he also became an emotional sounding board, especially for Meghan. In the now famous Oprah Winfrey interview, Meghan spoke glowingly of Perry, describing how he would call her regularly to check on her well-being. She said he had become a friend without ever having met her in person. It was a curious statement, one that suggested a depth of connection even before physical proximity existed. Once the Sussexes settled in California, the relationship deepened. Perry became Archie's godfather, a role that typically involves spiritual guidance, deep trust, and frequent presence. He began showing up more often at the Montecito property, sometimes for dinner parties, sometimes for long private talks. Those close to the couple say Meghan often referred to Tyler as her anchor, someone who understood the pressures of fame and expectations like no one else. But at what point does emotional support cross the boundary of a marital line? According to insiders who claimed to have witnessed interactions between Meghan and Perry, there was an energy, something that went beyond friendship. During late-night visits, doors were always closed. Conversations were whispered. When Harry would return from overseas events or royal funerals, Perry's presence was noticeably dialed back, only to resume once Harry departed again. Security staff at Perry's Los Angeles compound also reportedly grew suspicious when Meghan would show up alone during Harry's absences, staying for extended hours, often late into the night. One former guard, speaking anonymously, noted that Perry insisted on full privacy during these visits. No cameras, no staff nearby. Still, Perry's public image remained that of a benevolent protector. To many, his role was that of a guardian angel, offering Meghan a lifeline when the royal world turned its back. But others began asking tougher questions. Was this protection truly selfless? Or was it part of a deeper emotional entanglement? It's important to understand the emotional vacuum Harry was left in. After distancing himself from his family, severing ties with palace aides, and rebranding his identity around Meghan's vision of freedom, he had very few anchors of his own. Meghan, Markus, and Perry became the trio who dictated much of the Sussexes' public direction, and according to some former staffers, Harry had started to feel more like a supporting actor than a husband. He became less visible in planning sessions, less involved in Archewell's day-to-day operations. Even in joint interviews, his responses often felt secondary, reactive, as though he were echoing Meghan's words rather than offering his own. So when Harry allegedly discovered intimate messages between Meghan and these two men, it didn't just strike a nerve, it shattered a worldview. These weren't distant threats. These were people he had welcomed into his home, trusted with his wife, and seen as part of the new life he had sacrificed everything to build. The sense of betrayal ran deeper than romantic jealousy. It was institutional, existential. To Harry, discovering that the foundation he stood on, this new life outside the monarchy, was potentially built on deception must have felt like free-falling into nothingness. And those closest to him say he changed after that. He stopped defending Meghan to critics. He pulled away from public appearances. He traveled more, alone. The outsiders were no longer just close. They were inside, deep inside. And Harry, once the protector, now looked like the one in need of rescuing. The breakdown of any marriage is rarely instantaneous. It happens in stages, quiet, unsettling stages where one party begins to feel the chill of detachment, the loss of warmth that once made every fight worth it, every sacrifice bearable. For Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the strain on their marriage was both private and painfully public. But even as the world fixated on their coordinated smiles and curated interviews, something far more delicate was unraveling behind closed doors. To the outside world, they seemed unshakable. They had defied centuries of royal tradition, stood arm in arm against the British media, and relocated to North America in pursuit of freedom and dignity. But freedom came at a price. That price was isolation, from family, from institution, from familiar structure. And over time, it appears that isolation turned inward, eating away at the very bond that once held Harry and Meghan so tightly together. It began subtly, as many marital strains do. Harry, according to palace insiders and former aides, began to feel sidelined, emotionally, intellectually, and even publicly. Archewell, the nonprofit brand that was supposed to be a joint venture, began taking on the shape of a one-woman platform. Meghan, with her Hollywood contacts and PR savviness, naturally became the face of its messaging, while Harry's appearances were increasingly limited to background commentary and emotional support roles. There were days, insiders claimed, where Harry would sit in on Zoom meetings only to be spoken over or ignored. When creative ideas were shared, it was Meghan's perspective that usually carried the final decision. Her team, many of whom had long-standing ties to her career before she met Harry, rarely looped him in unless it was for appearances or final approvals. Even in interviews, Meghan often positioned herself as the one who understood the strategic direction, while Harry was framed more as an emotionally affected observer of royal trauma. That dynamic began to weigh on him. Friends say he started questioning whether he had truly escaped the shadow of the monarchy or merely walked into a different kind of control, this time under the guise of independence. He had exchanged one institution for another, and rather than finding the liberation he had hoped for, he found himself again following someone else's lead. Meghan, on her part, began exhibiting patterns familiar to those who had known her in her acting days. A tireless work ethic, yes, but also a tendency to micromanage, to control, and to shut out dissenting voices. As the months passed in Montecito, the couple stopped appearing at events together as often. Sources close to the Sussexes said they began to live on parallel tracks, still sharing a home but operating within different emotional orbits. Meghan's schedule became increasingly packed with podcast deals, production meetings, and confidential strategy sessions involving publicists and branding experts. Some of those meetings reportedly didn't include Harry at all. And when he did ask questions or push back, there were arguments, sometimes whispered and short, other times stretching late into the night. Harry's growing discomfort wasn't just with the way the marriage was operating, it was also with the people surrounding it. As Markus Anderson and Tyler Perry remained entrenched in Meghan's daily life, Harry became a ghost in his own home. Tyler was said to drop in unannounced, staying hours at a time in private conversations with Meghan. Markus, when not traveling, would often be found in their estate's library or office suite, consulting Meghan on everything from wardrobe to branding to staff hiring. What alarmed Harry most, insiders claimed, was that these two men seemed to have more influence over his wife's choices than he did. At one point, Harry reportedly confronted Meghan about Markus's increasing presence, asking whether it was necessary for him to stay overnight in their guest house while Harry was away on engagements. Meghan brushed it off, saying Markus was family, and that he was her emotional anchor during difficult times. She insisted that their relationship was purely platonic, and that Harry's concerns were rooted in outdated jealousy. But the discomfort lingered. When Harry suggested setting firmer boundaries between personal friendships and business operations, particularly around Archewell, he was met with resistance. Meghan, fiercely independent and protective of her inner circle, took it as a challenge to her authority. Their conversations grew colder, less affectionate, less understanding. Even more troubling were the whispered comments from staff. One former Archewell employee, who later left citing a toxic environment, alleged that Meghan frequently consulted Markus on staffing decisions more than she did Harry. In one instance, when a senior communications advisor clashed with Meghan over branding language, it was Markus who allegedly encouraged Meghan to fire the individual, despite Harry's efforts to mediate. Tyler Perry's role, too, began to weigh heavily. While his generosity in housing the couple had been appreciated early on, his ongoing presence raised eyebrows. According to a former member of their private security team, Perry would sometimes call the estate directly to speak with Meghan, bypassing her assistant. There were late-night conversations, sometimes lasting hours, and on more than one occasion, Meghan would disappear into her office with the door locked and emerge looking emotionally drained, but energized. Harry didn't say anything for months. Not directly, but he noticed the patterns. He began to sense the walls closing in, not from paparazzi, but from inside his own home. When he suggested they attend couples therapy, Meghan reportedly said they were too busy for such dramatic interventions. When he floated the idea of stepping back from some of their shared projects to spend more time together as a family, Meghan argued that this was their moment to capitalize on momentum. By late 2022, cracks began to show in public. Meghan would attend events solo, or with Markus as her advisor, while Harry was conspicuously absent. At one tech summit hosted in San Francisco, Meghan delivered a speech about online safety and children's mental health, an issue Harry had long championed, without once referencing her husband's own experiences or contributions. Observers took note. So did Harry. The birth of Lilibet, once expected to bring them closer, only widened the emotional gap. While Meghan was said to be hands-on and fiercely protective of her daughter, Harry often felt excluded from parenting decisions. Friends close to the couple claimed that Meghan leaned heavily on Markus and Tyler for parenting advice, more so than Harry. On one occasion, during a minor medical scare involving Lilibet, Harry reportedly found out about the incident hours after it happened because Meghan had already consulted with Tyler Perry. Tension boiled over during a private holiday in British Columbia, where Harry confronted Meghan over what he felt was emotional betrayal, not just in the possible romantic implications of her closeness to Markus and Tyler, but in the simple fact that she no longer seemed to treat him as a partner. Meghan defended herself, accusing Harry of being paranoid and emotionally needy. The fight, according to a source who heard audio from a security recording, ended with Harry storming out into the snow. In the months that followed, the silence between them deepened. Meghan poured herself into work, launching new business ventures and maintaining her high-profile image. Harry became increasingly reclusive, taking on solo engagements, some of them in the UK. On a trip to London for a veterans event, he reportedly extended his stay without telling Meghan. When asked by journalists about the couple's projects, he gave vague answers and avoided discussing Meghan at all. And then came the leak. The messages, allegedly romantic, unquestionably emotional, between Meghan and the two men Harry had always been wary of. It was the final blow. Whatever doubts he had entertained, whatever hope he'd clung to, vanished. Harry was no longer willing to pretend. The marriage that had once captivated the world was now disintegrating, not under the weight of public opinion or royal disapproval, but under the quieter pressure of emotional abandonment and boundary-crossing attachments. He packed his bags and left, not in anger, but in heartbreak, not to make a public statement, but to escape the growing feeling that he had become a stranger in his own marriage. If Prince Harry had seen Markus Anderson as nothing more than a loyal friend in Meghan Markle's inner circle, perhaps the story would have ended differently. But as the whispers grew louder and the circumstantial evidence began to mount, it became increasingly clear Markus was not just a side character in Meghan's life. He was central, embedded so deeply in her personal and emotional landscape that even Harry, her husband, couldn't fully penetrate that bond. To understand the role Markus played in the unraveling of this marriage, we must return to where it all began. Toronto, 2011. Meghan Markle was rising through the entertainment ranks, gaining fame on the legal drama Suits. But long before her name was synonymous with royalty or global fame, she was a regular face at Soho House Toronto, a sleek, members-only lounge for the artsy, elite, and influential. The man who ran that particular social ecosystem? Markus Anderson. Markus wasn't just a club executive. He was a power broker. With a Rolodex full of fashion designers, media executives, and celebrities, he was someone who could elevate your social standing simply by being seen next to you. Meghan understood this. She cultivated that relationship carefully. She didn't just visit Soho House, she frequented it, dined, networked, laughed with the right people. And Markus was always close by. He wasn't just a friend. He was a gatekeeper to the world Meghan was reaching for. Over time, their relationship deepened. Friends of Meghan during her Toronto years often remarked how inseparable she and Markus were. They went on trips together, New York, Ibiza, the Amalfi Coast. They attended parties arm in arm. When Meghan posted to her now-deleted Instagram, Markus appeared more often than most of her own family. The captions were always glowing. My favorite person. Best friend goals. My rock. But beneath those filtered images was a connection some began to question. Was it purely platonic? Or had it, at times, crossed into something more? A former stylist on Suits, who asked to remain anonymous, recalls one incident after a wrap party in late 2014. Meghan, visibly tipsy, left with Markus around midnight. The two had been physically affectionate all evening, exchanging long glances and quiet whispers. Though nothing overtly romantic was seen, there was an undeniable energy, an intimacy that transcended casual friendship. The stylist remembered thinking at the time, if they're not a couple, they're the closest thing to it without the label. Then came the introduction of Prince Harry. It was in the summer of 2016, during one of Meghan's visits to London. Markus, who had extensive ties in the UK's social scene through Soho House, is widely believed to have been instrumental in arranging the blind date between Meghan and Harry. He vouched for her, positioned her as the ideal partner for the wayward prince, and helped coordinate the logistics of their early meetings, including discreet accommodations. Markus's involvement didn't end there. He was with Meghan in Botswana during her romantic trip with Harry. He helped organize travel details, kept press away, and was reportedly on the ground in South Africa at the same time as Meghan, though never officially photographed with the couple. When Meghan returned to Toronto and resumed filming, Markus was her lifeline to Harry. He carried letters, helped relay private messages, and facilitated secret meetups in neutral locations. By the time Meghan moved to London in late 2017, Markus had already become a quiet presence behind the scenes. When Harry and Meghan officially announced their engagement, few noticed that Markus was already living part-time between London and New York, using Soho House's network to stay close. And when the royal wedding took place in May 2018, Markus Anderson had a front-row seat. Not even members of Meghan's own extended family had that privilege. Why was Markus elevated to such status? It wasn't just history. Meghan trusted him implicitly. And trust, for someone navigating the brutal glare of royal life, was priceless. Insiders from Kensington Palace at the time reported that Markus was seen entering the couple's residence at Nottingham Cottage on multiple occasions, sometimes alone, sometimes in the company of stylists or media advisors. Meghan valued his judgment more than most. When she questioned the wording of a speech or the design of a charity campaign, it was Markus she called. Still, many within the palace were uneasy. Some aides began referring to him as the Phantom Advisor, a man with no official title, no royal clearance, but outsized influence. Prince William, according to one well-placed source, once asked Harry during a private dinner, "Doesn't it bother you that Meg is always taking cues from him?" Harry reportedly brushed it off, insisting Markus was just a friend from her old life, someone she needed around to stay grounded. But over time, that explanation wore thin. By the time Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties in 2020, Markus's role only grew. He helped vet properties in Canada, advised on their team of PR consultants, and even facilitated introductions with potential brand partners. When Archewell was in its early stages, several staff were reportedly hired through recommendations made by Markus. He had become Meghan's right-hand man, without ever holding a formal position on paper. The turning point, according to one insider, came in early 2023. Harry was scheduled to attend a veterans event in the UK and would be away from Montecito for 6 days. Upon returning, he found Markus still at the estate, not just visiting, but living in the guest house. Meghan claimed it was temporary, that Markus was recovering from a back injury and needed a quiet place to rest. But something didn't sit right with Harry. The staff had been told not to disturb the guest house during that time. Security cameras in that area had been disabled. When Harry inquired, Harry didn't push the issue immediately, but suspicion had already taken root. It grew further when he overheard a conversation between Meghan and Markus that ended abruptly the moment he entered the room. Meghan quickly changed the topic. Markus avoided eye contact. From then on, Harry began watching more closely. He noted late-night conversations behind closed doors, inside jokes he wasn't part of, unexplained trips Meghan took to New York, always coinciding with Markus's appearances at Soho House events. Then came the moment Harry would later describe to a confidant as the fracture. While Meghan was in the shower, Harry noticed her iPad on the kitchen counter, unlocked and open to a messaging app. He didn't go looking for anything, but what he saw froze him. A thread of messages between Meghan and Markus. Emotional, intimate, at first ambiguous, then unmistakably suggestive. One message, dated just 2 weeks prior, read, "Last night replayed in my dreams. The way you held my hand. I haven't felt that scene in years." Another reference to private dinner during one of Harry's trips, where Markus wrote, "We shouldn't, but we do. And I know you feel it too." Harry didn't explode. He didn't scream or demand explanations. He simply closed the app, placed the iPad back, and walked out to the garden, alone, heart pounding, mind reeling. The betrayal wasn't just in the words. It was in the realization that the person he had defended against an entire monarchy may have been emotionally elsewhere the entire time. When he finally confronted Meghan, she denied everything. Said the messages were misinterpreted. Said Markus was being dramatic, poetic, misunderstood. But her voice shook. And when Harry asked her if she loved him, the answer took too long to come. The damage was done. In the days that followed, Harry stopped engaging. He canceled meetings, withdrew from Archewell planning sessions, began spending nights in a separate guest room. Markus, sensing the change, left the estate and never returned. But the silence between Harry and Meghan remained. And in that silence, the echoes of those messages, those glances, those years of private loyalty to another man, refused to fade. Markus may have been just a friend, or maybe something more. But what's certain is that his presence, and the emotional closeness he shared with Meghan, became the trigger point for Harry's realization that his marriage was no longer what it appeared to be. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle announced their bombshell decision to step down as senior royals in early 2020, few could have anticipated the chain of consequences that would unfold. The world watched as the couple stepped out of the rigid hierarchy of the British monarchy and into the arms of Hollywood, a move symbolized most dramatically not by their Netflix contract or Oprah interview, but by the quiet generosity of one man, Tyler Perry. To the public, Tyler's role was that of a benevolent guardian. He offered them sanctuary at their most vulnerable moment, opening the doors of his sprawling Beverly Hills estate when the world seemed to close every other one. But in the months and years that followed, Perry's relationship with Meghan deepened in ways that raised questions among insiders. And now, in the wake of Prince Harry's alleged departure from their Montecito home, that relationship is under intense scrutiny. It all began with a phone call. As Meghan described in her interview with Oprah Winfrey in 2021, she and Perry had never met in person before he reached out. He offered his home, his security team, and his emotional support. On the surface, it sounded like an act of extraordinary kindness, a man using his wealth and resources to help a young family escape persecution. But even then, critics wondered why Perry would insert himself so directly into a royal crisis he was not personally involved in. The answer, some now speculate, lies in the bond that quickly formed between Perry and Meghan. Once she and Harry arrived at the mansion, a 22-acre, hilltop compound featuring its own private guards, movie screening room, and multiple guest villas, Perry became more than a host. He became a confidant. He wasn't just offering a place to stay. He was listening, advising, protecting. Meghan later said that during some of her darkest hours, Perry would call to check on her. She spoke about those calls with reverence. When the couple moved into their permanent Montecito home later that year, Perry's presence did not fade. In fact, it intensified. According to individuals familiar with the household operations at both estates, Perry was a frequent visitor. Sometimes he stayed for dinner. Other times, he reportedly spent the night in one of the guest rooms. Staff described a man who was always relaxed, always welcome, and always moving freely around the property, often meeting Meghan in the study for long, closed-door conversations. To many, it appeared Perry had become a member of the family. And Meghan reinforced that perception when she and Harry named him the godfather of their daughter, Lilibet Diana. It was a title Perry accepted, though not without hesitation. In a podcast interview in 2022, he jokingly recounted that he initially didn't want to be a godfather in the royal sense, but was honored to accept on his own terms. But behind the lighthearted tone was a closeness that caught the attention of those around Harry. Insiders claim Harry began to feel a slow erosion of his influence in the household. Perry's counsel seemed to carry more weight than his own. While Harry tried to build Archewell into a meaningful organization focused on mental health, climate change, and veteran support, Perry's conversations with Meghan increasingly veered toward branding, storytelling, and Hollywood optics. Meghan, always adept at navigating celebrity culture, reportedly saw in Perry not just a friend, but a mentor, a man who had conquered media on his own terms and who could help her do the same. The bond between them deepened through their shared experience of being public figures who had weathered brutal scrutiny. Perry, who had been the subject of countless tabloid attacks and professional criticism over the years, understood the toll it could take. Meghan, navigating her own storm, found in him a kindred spirit. But while she leaned into that emotional reliance, Harry felt pushed further to the margins. A former staffer at Perry's production company claimed that Perry often spoke of Meghan with immense admiration. He described her as brilliant, misunderstood, and powerful, a woman who had been scapegoated for daring to change the rules. According to this source, Perry once confided that Meghan reminded him of his younger self, determined to break free of a system that tried to contain her. Such admiration is not inherently suspicious, but the frequency of their private meetings, combined with the emotional language exchanged between them, began to cause tension. A turning point came in early 2023, when Harry returned home from a solo trip to London. He had been attending an event marking the anniversary of his mother's death, and the occasion had left him emotionally raw. Upon his arrival, he was surprised to find Perry at the Montecito estate, not just visiting, but already settled in for what staff described as a multi-day strategy session with Meghan. Security logs indicated Perry had arrived the day before and requested privacy throughout his stay. Harry was reportedly blindsided. He had not been informed of Perry's arrival. When he questioned Meghan about it, she responded that Tyler was there to help her finalize production plans for an Archwell Media project. But when Harry suggested postponing the session to spend time as a family, Meghan declined. The work was too important, she said. Tyler had flown in for this specifically. It couldn't wait. That night, Harry and Meghan reportedly slept in separate rooms. The event marked a shift. Harry, once confident in the trust he shared with Meghan, began to feel as though key decisions were being made without him. He was not consulted on new hires, not briefed on media appearances, and increasingly sidelined in planning meetings. Meghan's responses to his concerns grew curt. She insisted that he didn't understand how the media world worked, that his instincts, shaped by royal training, were outdated and overly cautious. But perhaps the most troubling revelation came in the form of messages Harry later discovered. According to sources close to Harry, one evening he noticed Meghan had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she attended a Zoom call in another room. On the screen was an ongoing text thread between Meghan and Tyler. The tone was casual at first, updates on schedules and team meetings, but then became increasingly personal. Tyler complimented Meghan's resilience, her beauty, her fire. One message read, "Sometimes I wonder if Harry knows just how lucky he is." Another, sent late at night, said, "You deserve more than support. You deserve someone who sees all of you. Always." Harry didn't confront her immediately. He sat with the information, reread the messages, looked at the patterns, the long calls, the late-night visits, the emotional distance that had crept into their marriage. The next day, he quietly asked the security team for visitor logs. He began piecing together a timeline, dates when he had been away, at a funeral, at a veterans charity event, or on a UK court appearance, and dates when Perry had been present at the estate. The overlap was striking. On at least 5 occasions over the past year, Perry had stayed in Montecito while Harry was away, each visit unannounced to him until after the fact. When Harry finally confronted Meghan, her defense was firm. She accused him of spying, of violating her privacy, of being insecure. She insisted that Perry was a friend, a mentor, nothing more. But when Harry asked why she had kept the visit secret, her explanation faltered. She said she didn't want to burden him, that she knew he wouldn't understand, that Perry was helping her build something lasting, something that Harry just wasn't equipped for. It wasn't an admission of guilt, but it wasn't an assurance either. Harry's trust was broken, and with it, so was the last tether holding their marriage together. Tyler Perry has never publicly commented on the allegations. His representatives have declined to answer direct questions regarding his relationship with Meghan beyond their professional collaborations. But insiders say that following Harry's departure from Montecito, Perry has not returned to the estate. Whether that absence is temporary or permanent remains to be seen. What is clear is that Perry's role, initially seen as that of a savior, had evolved into something far more complex. Whether emotional affair, deep mentorship, or simply poor boundaries, the relationship between Meghan and Tyler became one of the flashpoints in Harry's slow, painful realization that he no longer held the central place in his wife's heart. The truth, as they say, doesn't always arrive with thunder and lightning. Sometimes it creeps in quietly, disguised as a question left unanswered, a pattern that no longer makes sense, a voice in your gut that refuses to be silenced. For Prince Harry, the path to truth wasn't a cinematic discovery. It was a slow, painful accumulation of small betrayals, subtle shifts, and the unsettling realization that the walls of his marriage were no longer holding. It began with a feeling, a gnawing discomfort that refused to leave him alone. Harry had long defended Meghan against the harshest critics, his family, the press, the palace machine. He had put his reputation, his status, and his royal title on the line to shield her from judgment. He had distanced himself from his brother, publicly challenged his father's decisions, and moved across the Atlantic to give her peace. And yet, for months, he had been watching that peace slip further from his reach. The signs were everywhere. Late-night phone calls Meghan would take in private. Excursions to Los Angeles that she'd initially claimed were business-related, but never quite aligned with the calendar of their public projects. A shift in her tone when she spoke to him, not unkind, but distracted. Harry had lived enough of his life in the public spotlight to recognize when someone was performing affection versus living it. One evening, after returning from a short trip to London for a military charity event, Harry arrived home to a noticeably cold welcome. Meghan wasn't at the gate to greet him, as she typically had been. The house was quiet. Their children were with the nanny. He found Meghan in the study, locked in conversation on a Zoom call. When she finally emerged, she was flustered, surprised to see him home early, and quickly mumbled something about a miscommunication. It wasn't just that moment. It was the culmination of many conversations that had become transactional. Shared glances that used to say everything now said nothing. Meghan's gaze was elsewhere, always tethered to something off-screen, out of reach. Harry did not want to believe the worst. He still hoped, desperately, that it was all a misunderstanding. That his suspicions were born out of exhaustion, out of pressure. But that hope was slowly eroding. The first major clue came not from Meghan directly, but from an unlikely source, a former staff member at the estate. This employee, who had worked as part of the estate's tech and security team, noticed unusual behavior with the home's internal surveillance settings. Rooms that typically had routine motion alerts were suddenly disabled. Logs showed unusual access activity around the guest quarters and study during times when Harry was out of the country. Security clearances had been manually adjusted, often for the same individuals, Markus Anderson and Tyler Perry. Harry didn't act on this immediately. He filed it away, quietly disturbed. But when he approached Meghan about the inconsistencies, she grew defensive. She claimed she was simply granting her close friends privacy, that constant monitoring felt invasive. She accused Harry of allowing his royal upbringing to shape his expectations around control and boundaries. Harry backed off, but something inside him refused to settle. A few weeks later, during one of the rare quiet evenings at home, Meghan left her iPad on the kitchen counter while taking a call outside on the veranda. The screen lit up with a new message. Harry, initially just walking by, glanced down and froze. It was a message from Markus. The tone was unmistakably intimate. The words were layered with meaning. I keep thinking about what we shared that night. I've never seen you like that. Do you think he suspects anything? The message hit like a sledgehammer. It wasn't a whisper of doubt, it was confirmation. Or at least, something too suggestive to explain away. Harry didn't open more messages. He didn't scroll. He simply stared, stunned, as his heart pounded in his chest. For years, he had trusted Meghan to be his safe space, the one person who had never betrayed him. And now, standing in the home he had helped build, far from the castles and courtyards of his royal life, he felt the ground give way beneath him. When Meghan returned, Harry was silent. He didn't confront her that night. He couldn't. He needed time to think, to process, to breathe. He slept in the guest room and stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment, every red flag he'd ignored, every whispered warning from friends, every moment he'd brushed aside discomfort in the name of loyalty. In the days that followed, Harry began to quietly investigate. He revisited his calendar, mapping his travel dates against known visits from Markus and Tyler. He noticed troubling patterns, particularly during his trips for the Queen's funeral, his charity work in Africa, and legal proceedings in the UK. On each occasion, there had been extended stays by one or both men. Meghan had explained it away each time. They're just helping with the kids, or we're brainstorming content for Archwell. But now those explanations rang hollow. He also accessed digital records. As someone still trained in security and data management, Harry knew how to interpret metadata. He found overlapping location pings, long message threads, video call logs that stretched well into the early morning hours. What disturbed him most weren't the logistical details, but the emotional language. The words exchanged. The emotional dependency woven into each interaction. It wasn't just casual contact, it was tethering. Intimacy. Something far deeper than friendship. Still, Harry wanted to give her a chance. One final chance to tell the truth. He waited until a quiet Saturday afternoon. The kids were at a supervised playgroup. The house was still. Meghan was reading in the garden. Harry sat down beside her and asked, with calm but unwavering clarity, "Is there anything you need to tell me?" Meghan looked up, confused. About what? About Markus. About Tyler. About us. She set the book down slowly. Her face shifted. Not fear, but calculation. There's nothing going on, Harry. You're being paranoid again. But he didn't look away. I saw the messages, Meg. Silence. I saw what he wrote. I saw what you said back. Her breath caught. For a moment, she said nothing. Whatever you think you saw, it's not what you think. she finally whispered. Then explain it, Harry said, his voice steady but cracking at the edges. She hesitated. I needed someone to talk to. You were gone. You were distant. I didn't feel seen. And so you went to him? You went to them? Harry asked. You locked me out, Meg. You built a world I didn't even know I was excluded from. The argument that followed was raw, brutal, and deeply emotional. Meghan accused Harry of abandoning her emotionally. Harry countered that she had replaced him emotionally long ago. They both cried. They both raised their voices. But the space between them never closed. And by the end of it, Harry stood up, packed a bag, and left. He didn't storm out. He didn't slam a door. He simply walked away. He flew to Scotland, alone, to a private estate tied to his mother's family, where no press, no courtiers, and no paparazzi could reach him. There, surrounded by silence and sea, Harry finally allowed himself to grieve, not just for the marriage, but for the version of himself he had lost trying to save it. In the days that followed Harry's quiet departure from Montecito, the air around the Sussex estate shifted dramatically. The staff noticed first. The Duke's private quarters were no longer being serviced. His clothes, typically laundered and returned with care, sat untouched in their drawers. His beloved black Range Rover, often parked near the front entrance, remained absent from the driveway. A new tension settled over the house, not loud or chaotic, but hauntingly still. It was as if something essential had left the building and everyone knew it. Meghan carried on, at least on the surface. She kept her schedule, attended her meetings, hosted her podcast guests with a radiant smile that betrayed no sense of personal upheaval. But behind the scenes, things were unraveling. Those closest to her say she became more erratic, more controlling, and more emotionally fragile. The facade of calm that she had so carefully built over the past few years was beginning to crumble, one carefully curated appearance at a time. Inside the Montecito mansion, Meghan reportedly confined herself to a smaller wing of the estate, where she took long walks in the garden and held hushed calls behind closed doors. Her inner circle, once expansive and meticulously managed, had begun to shrink. Tyler Perry, who had been a frequent visitor, ceased his in-person visits. Markus Anderson left California altogether. His departure, some say, was sudden, abrupt, even awkward. With Harry gone, the center of gravity shifted. Meghan found herself surrounded by assistants and staff who had always answered to both of them. Now, many of those same people struggled to balance loyalty. Some privately sympathized with Harry. Others remained fiercely loyal to Meghan, convinced she was being unfairly scrutinized, villainized, and abandoned. The divide became evident in daily operations, with certain staff refusing to work overlapping shifts and communication between departments becoming fractured. Meanwhile, Harry retreated into silence. In Scotland, nestled deep in the countryside, he surrounded himself with the kind of peace he hadn't known in years. No flashbulbs, no interviews, no PR briefings. Just quiet. He spent long hours walking along the locks, writing in journals, and speaking only to a small group of trusted friends. One source close to Harry described him as heartbroken, but clearer than he's ever been. He didn't just lose a wife, the source said. He lost the life he thought he was building. He lost the family he fought to protect. And most of all, he lost himself in the process. And now he's trying to find his way back. Reports suggest Harry limited all communication with Meghan to brief, civil conversations about their children. There were no long emotional calls, no late-night attempts at reconciliation. He had withdrawn emotionally, not as punishment, but as preservation. For years, he had sacrificed relationships, dignity, and security for a version of love he believed in. Now, with the veil lifted, he needed to rebuild himself, not as a prince or a husband, but as a man who had lost everything and had to begin again. Mental health professionals and former colleagues began to weigh in through media and private statements, noting visible changes in Harry's demeanor. A therapist familiar with trauma and royal figures, speaking anonymously to protect client confidentiality, commented that Harry was exhibiting signs of what is called intimate betrayal fatigue, a psychological term describing the prolonged impact of living with unacknowledged emotional betrayal while under public scrutiny. This fatigue, combined with his long-standing PTSD stemming from Princess Diana's death and his tumultuous royal upbringing, had reportedly left Harry drained. The breakdown wasn't explosive, the therapist explained. It was inevitable. It came after years of self-sacrifice and unresolved pain. Publicly, Meghan projected calm. She continued making appearances, though they became noticeably more scripted. At a women's empowerment summit in Los Angeles, she gave a speech about resilience and self-love that seemed to strike some attendees as particularly self-referential. "When people stop clapping for you, clap for yourself," she said, standing before a packed room. But those close to her admitted she was struggling privately. Late nights filled with tears, long silences, moments of visible agitation. Some media outlets picked up on the cracks in the public image. Tabloids speculated about an impending divorce. Paparazzi reported seeing Meghan without her wedding ring at a recent outing. Meanwhile, Harry was photographed boarding a private jet alone, carrying a single duffel bag and wearing a hooded sweater, a man trying to disappear from the world he once embraced so fiercely. Back in Montecito, the children became a delicate subject. Archie, now old enough to ask questions, reportedly began noticing the absence of his father. Staff were instructed to avoid discussing Harry's whereabouts. Meghan attempted to maintain a sense of normalcy, taking the children to parks and playdates, but those around her could see the emotional toll it was taking. Without Harry, her carefully curated narrative of the modern family began to fall apart. Tensions reached a new level when Meghan's legal team, without Harry's knowledge, began inquiring about property rights. Emails were sent to attorneys representing Harry regarding ownership of certain shared estates and trademarks associated with Archewell. Though Meghan hadn't yet filed for divorce, these preemptive moves signaled to many that she was preparing for a possible split, not just personal, but financial and corporate. This development further devastated Harry. Archewell had been one of the last projects they built together. Now, it appeared even that was under threat. According to those close to him, Harry began to question not just his marriage, but the foundation of every decision he'd made since leaving the UK. Had he been manipulated? Had he mistaken love for loyalty? Was he a pawn in a larger game he never fully understood? For Meghan, the concern was image control. While her team worked overtime to draft statements and manage potential fallout, she remained behind the scenes, strategizing. She reportedly held a series of late-night meetings with her publicist and legal advisors, crafting a potential new narrative: a strong woman abandoned, a mother left to raise her children alone, a survivor of emotional imbalance. But not everyone was buying it. Social media began turning. Comments that once praised Meghan's strength and independence now questioned her sincerity. A trending hashtag #WhereIsHarry, began circulating on Twitter, with thousands speculating about the silence. Even former supporters of the couple began to express concern that something serious had occurred, something neither side was fully revealing. Inside the palace walls, Buckingham officials maintained their usual silence. But royal insiders leaked that King Charles was deeply saddened by the breakdown of the marriage and had privately extended an invitation for Harry to return for an extended stay. William, for his part, reportedly remained distant, not yet ready to repair the fractured relationship. But Kate Middleton, ever the peacemaker, had allegedly reached out quietly to Harry to offer support, particularly in regard to the children. The emotional fallout extended beyond the couple. Friends found themselves caught in the crossfire. Business partners grew wary. Archewell employees, once enthusiastic about their visionary employers, began to express burnout and confusion over their future. One former employee commented, "It's like we're all actors in a play, but the script keeps changing, and no one knows who's writing it anymore." Through it all, Harry remained silent. No interviews, no tweets, no anonymous leaks, just silence. A silence that spoke volumes. Tonight, the fairy tale ends in a storm of secrecy, shattered trust, and two names no one saw coming: Markus Anderson and Tyler Perry. After months of quiet tension, Prince Harry has walked out, leaving Meghan Markle behind. Why? Leaked messages, secret visits, and emotional connections that have set fire to their marriage. This isn't speculation, it's the unraveling of a global power couple. Stay with us as we uncover the private texts, the hidden timelines, and the explosive moment Harry finally said, "Enough is enough."